Hello everyone, my name is Reid. I'm a professional officer and social worker at BASW, the British Association of Social Workers. I'm really delighted to have with me Kim Johnson, MP, today for Labour, and she represents Liverpool, Riverside. Kim is on the Women and Equalities Committee, the Education Committee, and the Speaker's Advisory Committee on Works of Art, and also the Home Affairs Committee. Are those all correct, Kim?
No, my name is Kim Johnson. I am the Labour MP for Liverpool Riverside. I was elected in 2019 as a first Black MP for Liverpool, and I will always say it's a very sad indictment of my city, given that we are the oldest established Black community in the country. So no, I now sit on Women and Equalities and Home Affairs. I dropped education to move on to the Home Affairs Select Committee. I also have an interest in the arts, so I do sit on the Speaker's Work of Art Committee, and I have involvement in a number of parliamentary groups, you know, around children, poverty, race and education. So my day is usually full of going to various meetings and doing those kind of things. But there you go, Wayne. That's me in a nutshell in terms of my parliamentary career at the moment.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you. And thanks for giving us a brief overview of your remits and things that you're involved in, Kim. Can I ask a little bit about your sort of social background then? You have touched on that slightly in your introduction. I just wondered in terms of how you would describe that. Clearly you're from Liverpool, a northerner like myself. Mm-hmm. But can you give us some, just a little bit of insight into your upbringing and how you moved into mainstream politics, please?
Okay, so I'm one of five, grew up in Liverpool 8, and a community that is renowned for challenging both social and racial injustice. You know, the area was blighted by very poor relations with the police. We had lots of issues in terms of our Black community and the police at the time, the 70s, probably earlier. And you know, I was involved in a number of rallies, demonstrations and challenges against both the police and the Tory government at the time. You had, you know, the Thatcher government, you know, Thatcher, the milk snatcher she was known as, you know, she had a campaign to manage the decline of Liverpool over those years in the 70s and 80s. So I would say that I cut my political teeth, as it were, on the streets of Liverpool as a teenager, you know, fighting social and racial injustice.
Admirable work, important work. So would you say that you were an activist before you got into trade unionism then?
I would say so, yes, you know, because I didn't become an active trade unionist until I started working in the Liverpool City Council. And I got involved when the team I was working in was going to be reorganised, and so it meant reduction in staff and reduction in pay. And I wasn't very happy about that. So at the consultation event, I made some challenges, and the representatives from Unison branch saw me as a prospective workplace rep. And so I got active in Unison after that time. So as a teenager on the streets of Liverpool, you know, I wasn't aware. Well, I've always been a trade unionist, you know, from working, because that was what we were told when we first worked. And so I joined what was then the Transport and General Workers Union. And the precursor.
Was that the industry you worked in, was it?
Well, at that time I was involved in community work. But prior to that, when I worked at the tax office, I was a member of what was a precursor of, I suppose, the PCS union. So I've always been involved in unionism, but I've not been active. It wasn't until, as I say, you know, I got involved while I was working at the city council. So I became a rep Then I got involved in regional activities. So I sat on the regional council. I became the deputy chair of the regional and then the national Black members committee. I was on Labour Link committee and international committees, and so it gave me a lot of opportunity to network and have a greater understanding in terms of the role of trade unionism in terms of politics. So it was very it was very useful and informative.
It sounds fascinating, that journey, and it sounds like it's been kind of and very sort of clearly an upward trajectory, but from, you know, very difficult beginnings, kind of that sort of street activism and protesting that you were talking about. So thank you for that. You mentioned slightly, I think, about some of the discrimination that you'd faced and that, you know, that we face as people of colour. What sort of impact has that had on you, would you say, over the years?
Well, I suppose that discrimination, race discrimination, has a major impact on Black people, you know, and until you actually experience it, you will not know what it's like, you know, whether that's being passed over for jobs or you know, being deemed of not being having the skills to be able to do something. You know, when I was at school, you know, I was never encouraged, you know, to think about higher education or universities, because as you know, a Black working class girl from Liverpool 8, you know, my trajectory in life was to go to work in a factory, in retail, or you know, do those jobs. And there's nothing wrong with those jobs, but it's about, you know, teachers had no aspirations for me, but I had my own aspirations. So it was about, you know, constantly challenging those barriers and those expectations. So, and I did that.
You've done a great job. I congratulate you on what you do and what you've achieved. So, so thank you. All right. What role or influence do you think trade unionism has on mainstream politics now, given where we're at, without going into detail in any one particular issue? But is trade unionism as influential as it used to be, maybe in previous years, do you think?
I think we've seen a massive increase in membership in terms of our trade union movement, particularly since COVID, particularly the way that some unscrupulous employers treated staff, you know, fire and rehire, you know, and treating staff badly. And we saw that right across the board. And I think we've seen an increase in trade union membership, and I think we've seen, you know, some really great successes and wins. You know, last year before, we've seen massive industrial action from you know, a number of trade union. You know, last week we had junior doctors, BMA, on strike. You know, we've seen ongoing disputes from RMT, ASLEF, PCS. You know, right across the board, Unison, mental health social workers are on strike in Brent at the moment. So you know, but it is about that collective action, and the fact that, you know, a lot of workers saying, you know, enough is enough. You know, everything's going up apart from wages. You know, so particularly public sector, you've seen a decrease in wages. You know, real term pay cuts in wages, you know, an attack on terms and conditions of employment. And so people have said, not having it no more, you know, the teachers. So we've seen, as I say, you know, nurses, everybody saying enough's enough. You know, and I think from my point of view as a trade unionist, you know, success does breed success. And so we have had some, you know, great wins.
I was just going to say, in terms of outcomes, there has been some wins, hasn't there, for certain professions and industries. Social work less so, I think. I mean, I know you touched on the situation in Brent, obviously it's ongoing. But what aspirations or promises can you make at this point as to what a Labour government then would provide for public services, particularly social work, although it covers many sectors? You know, can you sort of promise that there will be an injection of very necessary finance?
I personally can't make those commitments, unfortunately. I'm a backbench MP, but, you know, Rachel Reeves, our shadow chancellor, has talked about fiscal responsibility. And it's about only funding those things that we've got funding for. But you will know, Wayne, that the last 14 years we're seeing, you know, significant reduction in funding right across the public sector, particularly local authorities who are responsible for the delivery of both adults and children's services, you know, being cut to the quick. And we know that both adults and children's are heavily reliant on the private sector for some of our outsourced services.
Yes.
You know, so we are using massive amounts of public sector funding to improve the profits of private sector providers. You know, we're not getting a quality service, so something needs to happen. And as of yet, we've yet to hear how an incoming Labour government will invest the funding that's necessary to support and bolster the public sector, you know, particularly local authorities. I'll give an example. Liverpool has lost 63% of its revenue funding from government. You know, it has an impact, so that needs to change significantly.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. And in terms of that incoming Labour government, can you kind of give us some sort of idea, though, of as to how much this is on the radar in terms of the lack of funding, then, that, you know, has a direct impact on social work, but many other public sector areas as well?
Well, it is on the radar because we did an inquiry in terms of children's social care, you know, Josh McAllister review, you know, the recommendations he put forward. You know, so we have a crisis in social work the way that we have across the public sector at the moment in terms of the recruitment and the retention of qualified social workers. You know, and so the social workers that we have at the moment are, you know, struggling under, you know, really heavy workloads. And we are seeing increasing numbers of children entering into, you know, social services, but also entering in at a much older age. You know, more teenagers are, you know, becoming the responsibility of local authorities, and we need to be focusing more, I believe, in terms of early intervention and preventative work. You know, before I was elected, I worked for Sure Start. And I think Sure Start, from my point of view, provided great investment in terms of our communities, provided opportunities for public sector organisations to work together in an integrated manner to improve opportunities.
Yeah, I agree. And it's something that I think there's been discussion about, a sort of reformation of Sure Start under a different banner. But I agree, when I was in frontline practicing social work, I worked with similar community organisations who were vital, really, for families. How do you think that people from working class backgrounds then could be more encouraged to get involved in sort of politics and aspiring to the levels that you're at in the Labour Party, Kim?
And so it's, suppose, you know, you have to start from having an interest in making some significant change, and whether that's within your local community, within your workplace, within your school environment, you know, it has to be born out of wanting to make change and not just, you know, for getting involved in politics for politics' sake, I would say.
Okay, I see. So just kind of within the spaces that people are already in, making some positive change. And if it leads towards politics, great, but just influencing positive change where they're at. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, because I spent more than 20 years working in community development, and I came across lots of people working within their own communities to make change, whether that's improve, you know, safety of roads, improving childcare facilities, you know, whatever. But it was those people who had an interest, you know, wanting to get involved, working closely with organisations, working closely with local councillors. They're the people, you know, that I think provide the opportunity to enter into politics. So they've already got an interest and they want to use, you know, their skills and experience to influence change.
Okay, all right, thank you. My next question is about an article regarding Keir Starmer recently, and some praise that he gave for Margaret Thatcher. And you talked about Margaret Thatcher being a milk snatcher when you were growing up, or sort of having that nickname in Liverpool. How do you think that would have been received?
Well, I know how I received it, and I was gobsmacked, to say the least. I found it, totally unhelpful, the way that a lot of people in Liverpool would find it unhelpful. And whoever advised him to say those things, was very misjudged. She isn't a hero. She was involved, as I say, in trying to manage the decline of my city. Her neoliberal policies that she invoked alongside her busy mate Ronald Reagan has led us to where we are now. In terms of the level of austerity, the massive divides between those that have money and those that don't, the inequalities in both health and education. I think she is the harbourer of those changes that have not benefited, places like Liverpool, the Northeast and the Northwest.
Yeah. Okay, thanks for sharing that and for your views on that, Kim. And I guess that those comments were helped even less by the fact that Jacob Rees-Mogg had said he'd welcome Keir Starmer to the Conservative Party based on those comments as well. So, food for thought. Something else that I want to talk to you about, Kim, is the institutional racism within social work and the sort of detrimental impact that has on Black and global majority people. I've done a little bit of work in social work myself around anti-racism, and I just wondered what your thoughts were about the social care RES. You might not be familiar with that acronym, but that's the Workforce Race and Equality Standards for Social Care. Oh, you are familiar with that. And it's something that's sort of been established, I think, in the NHS for quite some time, but has taken some time to really get embedded within social work. And again, incoming Labour government, is that something that will be prioritised and hopefully made mandatory so that employers, have some accountability around race equality? Do you think?
The thing is, Wayne, we already have legislation. We have the Equality Act. We have public sector equality duty. We already have a plethora of legislation that holds people to account in terms of improving race equality. So, I would say, it doesn't take rocket science. You mentioned the NHS and the RES. But we know that there are massive levels of inequality within a health service. There was a report published some years ago called Snowy White Peaks, talking about the underrepresentation of Black workers in the higher echelons of power within the sector. But that is very representative right across the board. Unison did some work when I was there some years ago about Black representation within local authorities. And again, you say, particularly in my local authority, very few Black senior officers. And I'm the firm belief if that we don't have Black people at the table in those positions, then our issues aren't heard and action isn't taken. So while that is still prevalent, I think, we need to be looking at recruitment, retention and promotion within our organisations and utilising the powers that we have in terms of public sector equality duties. Every organisation has to provide workforce monitoring data every year. But it's about, you do it, but what do you do with it? So you need to be, really. You need to be scrutinising those reports and saying if there hasn't been any change, why? And then putting an action plan in place and having someone as senior as the chief exec of the organisations taking responsibility for making change, and that isn't happening, because I ultimately believe that people don't care. Because, those people at the top of the organisation may, give us platitudes. Yes, we know things aren't great. Yes, we know that we need to make change. Yes, we know we need to do better. Well, do we? JFDI is what I say.
Yeah. Okay. So, I mean, it sounds like we're fully agreed on that. I would echo everything that you said. I guess my point, though, was about that accountability aspect of it, that yes, some of those frameworks and legal duties already exist in terms of monitoring data and so on. But actually being compelled to implement some of this stuff, that's not there, is it, in the legislation? And I'm not saying the res can sort of provide that in its current
No,
iteration. But surely that's the kind of
no,
direction of travel we
no.
need to be moving
It
in.
is the direction, and Annalisa Dodds, our shadow equality minister, has, in terms of manifesto pledge, talked about a race equality strategy going forward,
Okay,
a Race Equality Act, to
right.
strengthen those things. But,
Yeah,
without powers and without people
yes,
taking responsibility, things will just remain the same. And you will
they will.
know that this government has a view on race and institutional racism, as in it
Yeah,
doesn't exist. The highly discredited Sewell report,
yes.
and race and racism. And then you've got black members of the Tory government, discounting and discrediting, the experiences of many working class black people in this country.
And so, is the term institutional racism then something that you think Labour will adopt going forward? Because at the moment, I guess there hasn't been much kind of opposition or visible opposition to the Sewell report that you mentioned, or some of the other kind of avoidances of the term institutional racism. Where does Labour stand on that?
I would like to give you a definitive answer on that, Wayne, and unfortunately I can't, because you will know that the party has been accused of a hierarchy of racism under the report on behalf of the Labour Party.
Yes.
Identified, major issues in the party, and from my point of view, they haven't been dealt with and not dealt with effectively. I would hope that the party says that we recognise that institutional racism is a problem, and we are going to do everything that we can to deal with it and challenge it and put things into place to make sure that there are better levels of equality for black people in this country going forward.
Yes. All right. Look, thank you for sort of exploring that with me. I appreciate it. And I've just got two last questions. Your colleague Bell Riberio-Addy has called for Labour to show real ambition to eliminate racial disparities in employment by wielding the stick of sanctions for employers who refuse to take action to address racism at work. We've touched on this already with the res, but I guess I just really want to emphasise that from a social work perspective, at least, black and global majority social workers are disproportionately affected by sort of fitness to practice and their ability to practice based on, concerns that are raised about them. And there's a lot of kind of evidence to suggest that, it's quite an unfair process for them. So I really want to echo your colleagues' comments, really, about showing ambition, as a potential Labour government going forward.
Well, I would fully support Bell's statement and think that action does need to be taken. I know what it was like when I worked in adult services in Liverpool City Council. Families would complain about black social workers and say, I'm not going to work with them because of racism. And managers would take that on board and would shift black social workers without undertaking any kind of investigation. You know what I mean? And so they are the issues that we're dealing with. And again, it's because, we don't have senior black professionals at the head of organisations saying that this is unacceptable, and scrutinising some of that data, because we used to receive data about the number of disciplinaries, and again, disproportionately higher for black workers, even now there were less numbers within the organisation. And I think that happens right across the board.
It does.
And
from what I've seen.
And often, in terms of work taking cases, taking cases through their unions is very difficult and very difficult to win. But there are significant problems and issues for staff within these organisations.
They really are, yeah, and it really sounds like you've got a clear understanding and experience of what that's like. So, you know, I do hope it's something that you and the, you know, Labour colleagues and MPs are able to take forward should you win the election, which looks pretty certain. Last question from me, Kim, and thanks again for this conversation. If you could be granted 3 political wishes, what would they be?
I would hope that we could get more Black communities involved in politics and giving people the opportunities. You know, the Tory party seem to do very well in terms of electing Black MPs for predominantly white middle class areas. I think we need to do better. You know, it's about retaining, you know, our political representatives and providing greater opportunities for young people to have a voice and have a say within the political environment.
Yeah, so that's 2. I make that 2. So that's sort of recruitment and retention. And what would your 3rd political wish be?
That we, as a party, have more than 1 term.
Okay, right. Okay, that's an interesting one. Okay, yeah, thank you. So look, thank you ever so much for meeting with me today. It's been so good talking to you. I've got a real deep insight into your own experience, but also what you stand for and, you know, what your hopes are for the future. So thanks ever so much, Kim.
Wayne, thank you so much for contacting me. It's been a real pleasure and talking to you. So all the best in terms of BASW and all the work that you're doing. So well done to you.
Oh, thanks ever so much.